The first thing my son heard that evening wasn't my voice. It was the anchor on the 6 o'clock news saying my name. Authorities say a retired Pittsburgh nurse kept 4 people alive at the scene of a multi-vehicle collision outside the airport tonight, working alone until first responders arrived. My son set down his fork. My daughter called him before the segment ended. And 2 hours earlier, both of them had told me to get a ride share. I had just flown in from Houston. In the bag on my shoulder were their father's ashes. My name is Eleanor Vance. Most people call me Nell. I spent 38 years in intensive care at UPMC, which means I know exactly how to stay calm while somebody else is dying. I just never learned how to stay calm while being forgotten. But I should start 6 months earlier, because none of this makes sense without Walt. My husband was a carpenter, 41 years of cabinets, staircases, and other people's kitchens. He had sawdust in the cuffs of every shirt he owned, and he had a habit that drove me half out of my mind for 4 decades. Walt wrote everything down. Small leather notebooks, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $2. He filled them with measurements. Wood species, the date he planted the maple in the backyard, the price of gas in 1994, when our daughter lost her first tooth. Walter, I used to tell him, just write down the day you plan to die and save yourself the trouble of the rest. He'd look up at me over his reading glasses and say, "Already did, Nell. You're not on the list." That was his idea of romance. After 42 years, I'd stopped asking for a better one. The diagnosis came in March, stage 3 pancreatic. The oncologist in Pittsburgh was kind about it, which is somehow worse than being blunt. She used the word comfort 4 times in 11 minutes. I've been a nurse long enough to know what that word means when a doctor says it slowly. Walt took it the way he took everything. He nodded. He asked what the next step was. Then he went out to the garage and sanded a drawer front for 2 hours. I sat in the car in our own driveway and did not go inside. 2 weeks later, a trial opened at MD Anderson in Houston. Phase 2, 14% response rate, which sounds like nothing until it's your husband, and then 14% sounds like a door standing open. Here is what nobody tells you about American medicine. The insurance covered the drug. It covered the infusions, the scans, the blood work. It did not cover a plane ticket. It did not cover an apartment 2 miles from the cancer center for 6 months, because the protocol required him within 30 minutes of the facility. It did not cover parking, or the rental furniture, or the $11 sandwiches in the hospital cafeteria. We were not poor. We were the other thing. The thing most people are. We were fine, right up until the moment we weren't. I emptied the retirement account in April. I signed the withdrawal papers at a desk in a strip mall while a young man in a tie explained the tax penalty to me twice, slowly, as if I were confused. I wasn't confused. I was doing arithmetic. In May, I sold my car, a gray sedan with 91,000 miles on it and a dent in the passenger door from a shopping cart in 2017. I told the children I hardly drove anymore, that it was foolish to pay insurance on a car that sat in the driveway. Dean said. "Makes sense. Ma," Corinne said. "You should have told us. We could have helped." I said what I always said. "I'm fine, honey." I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence in my life. 3 words. I said them so often and so easily, and for so many years that my children eventually did me the courtesy of believing me. Walt's truck stayed in the garage under a canvas tarp, a 2009 Silverado, blue, with his initials scratched into the tailgate by a nail he swore he never found. "I didn't sell that," I couldn't have told you why at the time. I know why now. We flew to Houston on the 1st of June. He packed 2 shirts, a tape measure he had no use for, and 4 blank notebooks. I asked him what he needed those for. He said, "In case something happens worth remembering." Walt wasn't a talker. He was a writer down of things. It took me 40 years to understand those were the same thing. The apartment came furnished, which is a word real estate people use when they mean there is a bed in it. A fold-out sofa bed with a bar that found my spine every night. A mini fridge that hummed in B-flat. A window over a parking lot. And past it, the cancer center, where they hooked my husband to a bag of something with a number instead of a name. 63 days. I didn't know the number then. Nobody hands it to you in advance. I learned that ceiling, a crack above the bed that ran east to west and then hooked south, like a river changing its mind. A water stain near the closet shaped like Ohio. I know those 2 things better than most people I went to high school with, because I studied them every night at 3 in the morning while Walt slept, and I counted the seconds between his breaths. That's the part nobody warns you about, not the treatment. The waiting room that is also your living room. Dean flew down once. I want to be fair, because it matters that I get this right. He came. He booked the flight himself. He stayed 2 nights at a hotel nearby, because there was nowhere else to put a grown man. He sat with his father through the first infusion. He held the cup of ice chips. He asked the nurse good questions, the kind a man asks when he has read 3 articles on a plane and wants somebody to know it. Then on the 2nd day, he set up his laptop in the lobby, because a deal was closing, and took calls with one hand over his ear while people in wheelchairs rolled past toward the elevators. He wasn't wrong to do it. That's what I need you to understand. He had a mortgage, a son, and a firm that would have replaced him in a month. He did what he thought a man does. He hugged his father goodbye and said, "I'll be back down soon. Dad." He meant it. I have never once doubted that he meant it. Corinne called on Sundays, video, always. And every week she'd angle the phone so Walt could watch Theo do something behind her, a cartwheel, a spelling word, a drawing held too close to the lens. 11 minutes. That was the average, I know, because I wrote it down. Not to keep score, I was a nurse for 38 years, and I chart things. Sunday, 11 minutes, ate half a banana afterward. Sunday, 9 minutes, good day, sat up. I filled a whole notebook that way. Walt would have appreciated the irony. I never told him. Here is what makes this hard to explain to anyone who wants a villain. My children loved their father. Genuinely. Uncomplicatedly. Dean cried on the phone with me in July and had to hang up. Corinne mailed a card every week in her schoolteacher handwriting, and Walt kept them stacked under the lamp. They were not cruel. They were not selfish. Exactly. They simply believed that showing up for the big moments was the same as showing up. They thought grief had a date on it, like a wedding that if you appeared on the right day in the right clothes, you'd done the thing. Nobody teaches you that the big moment is the easy part. Walt died on a Tuesday morning, the 9th of August, at 6:14 while the sky over the parking lot turned from gray to the color of a peach. He was cremated in Houston. He'd asked for that himself back in April, in his own handwriting, on a form he filled out without telling me until it was done. We held the service there. Small a chapel attached to the funeral home. 11 people, most of them nurses. Dean flew down. Corinne flew down. Both came. Both stood and spoke. Dean's voice broke on the word workshop. Corinne read something she'd written at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning. Then they flew home that same afternoon. Dean had a closing on Thursday. Corinne had a building full of children starting school in 9 days. They hugged me at the curb outside departures and asked if I'd be all right. I said what I always say. I stayed 2 more days. Texas death certificates, 3 certified copies. Because the bank wants one and the pension wants one. The forms for flying human remains, there are forms. A specific container. A letter you carry. The billing office, where a woman named Delia was very kind and the number was still the number. Then the apartment. I wiped down the mini fridge before I left. Nobody was coming. I did it anyway. My children were at their father's funeral. They were just absent from every other day. I kept Walt on my lap for the entire flight home. That is not a poetic way of saying I thought about him. I mean, the bag containing his ashes rested across both my knees from Houston to Pittsburgh. One hand looped through the strap, the other laid flat over the zipper. The flight attendant stopped beside me before takeoff. "Ma'am, that bag needs to go under the seat." "No," I said. She glanced at the overhead bins, then back at me. She was young enough to be my granddaughter and patient enough not to make me explain myself in front of 30 strangers. "Is there something fragile inside my husband is in here?" Her expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. She crouched, checked that the strap was secured, and said, "Keep it with you," so I did. During turbulence, I pressed my palm against the bag. Walt used to reach for my hand whenever a plane shook. Though he was the one who hated flying, he would squeeze twice. Once meant, "I'm here." Twice meant, "This is probably nothing." The seat beside me was empty, for 42 years. An empty seat had usually meant Walt had gone to get coffee, ask a question nobody needed answered, or inspect something mechanical he had no business touching. This one stayed empty all the way to Pittsburgh. We landed a little after 5. People stood before the seatbelt sign went off, opening bins and calling relatives. "Just landed. Come around to door 4. Yes, I can see you." I stayed seated until the aisle cleared. Then I carried Walt off the plane, at baggage claim. I sat beneath a television showing the weather with the sound turned off. I opened the family group chat. Dean, Corinne, me. Walt's name was still at the top of the screen, though his number had been silent for 63 days. I typed Mom landed. I miss Dad so much. I stared at it for 10 seconds. Then I deleted it. It sounded like grief asking to be managed. I typed again. "I'm back. Could one of you pick me up if you're busy? That's completely fine." I deleted the last sentence. Then I put it back. Then I deleted the whole message. I tried once more. I can wait if somebody can come later. That sounded worse. It made waiting sound like a favor I was offering, instead of something I had already begun doing. I deleted that one too. 4 deletions, 4 small attempts to make myself easier to love. There is a particular kind of editing mothers learn to do. We remove every word that might sound demanding. We soften the question before anyone has refused. We provide the excuse on behalf of the person we are asking. Finally, I sent the sentence after sanding it smooth enough that no part of it could inconvenience anyone. Mom just landed at PIT. I brought Dad home. Could someone pick me up? Women my age are not especially afraid of dying. We are afraid of becoming an appointment in our children's calendars. The message showed as delivered, then read, no answer. I watched a little girl run into her grandfather's arms. A man in a Steelers jacket lifted a sleeping toddler from a stroller while his wife dragged 2 suitcases behind her. An older couple stood holding each other without speaking, as if they had been separated for years instead of one flight. I moved Walt's bag closer to my chest. 10 minutes passed, then 20. At 31 minutes, Dean's typing bubble appeared, vanished, and appeared again. At 40 minutes, his message arrived. "Ma, can you get an Uber? Traffic into the airport is terrible right now. I'm at dinner with a client." 3 minutes later, Corinne replied, "Mom, I just took 3 days off and I'm buried at work. Could you please get a ride?" Neither message contained the word dad. Not one question about the flight. Not one question about whether I had eaten. Not one question about what it felt like to carry their father through airport security in a sealed container. I read both messages twice. Then I answered with 2 words, "No worries." I did not order an Uber. It was not a protest. I was too tired for protests. And grief is expensive enough without adding surge pricing. I had sold my car in May. Dean knew that. Corinne knew that. I had told them it made sense because I hardly drove anymore. They had believed me. Outside baggage claim. The evening air felt cooler than Houston and smelled faintly of rain and jet fuel. I followed the signs toward public transportation. The 28X bus would take me downtown for $3. $3 was $3. I checked the route twice, although I knew it already. Some habits survive exhaustion, verify the address. Count every stop, and keep moving. Nurses are trained not to become the emergency themselves. I shifted the bag higher on my shoulder and walked toward the bus stop, carrying my husband home by myself. Before I reached the bus stop, I saw an elderly woman struggling with a suitcase at the curb. She was small, maybe 80, wearing a lavender coat. The suitcase had one broken wheel, so every time she pulled, it twisted sideways and nearly took her with it. "Let me help you," I said. "I've got it," she answered, though she clearly did not. I set Walt's bag on the bench, lifted the suitcase with both hands, and placed it safely on the curb. The woman touched my sleeve. "I'm Doris Kellerman, Nell Vance." "You're kind, Nell Vance." She glanced at the bag on my shoulder. "I hope somebody does the same for you someday." I smiled. "I hope so too." The sound came before the impact. A horn, tires screaming against pavement, then metal folding into metal with a force I felt in my chest. A black SUV had entered the airport intersection against the light and struck a fuel tanker. The tanker rolled and landed across 2 lanes, its cab against the median. Fuel streamed from beneath the tank, spreading across the asphalt. It had not caught fire, not yet. Behind it, a sedan had spun into 2 other vehicles. Smoke pushed from beneath its hood, gray at first, then darker. Everyone around me reached for a phone. I did not. I placed Walt's bag on the sidewalk with both hands, away from the road, and checked that it was upright. Then I stepped into traffic. 4 vehicles, 7 people. That was my first count. The tanker driver was conscious but trapped. A woman in the sedan held her shoulder. A little girl in the back seat was awake. A middle-aged man lay beside an open door, motionless. 2 people were walking wounded. The 7th was a boy. He was half inside the SUV, half on the pavement, 16, maybe 17. Blood was spreading beneath his right leg too quickly. I pointed at a man filming. "You! Call 911. Put it on speaker and repeat everything they tell you." He stared. Now, he lowered the phone and dialed. I pointed at a woman in red. "Collect every coat and scarf you can find. Bring them here." Then at 3 men moving toward the tanker. "Do not touch that truck. Do not start any engine. Get everyone back from the fuel." They stopped. Authority is sometimes nothing more than sounding certain before anyone else does. I knelt beside the boy. "What's your name, Isaiah?" "Isaiah, what Coleman?" "Good, Isaiah Coleman. Look at me. I'm Nell. I'm a nurse." The wound was high on his thigh. Arterial. I pulled off my scarf, wrapped it above the injury, tied a knot, and used a metal tire tool as a windlass. Isaiah screamed. "I know," I said. "You're allowed." I tightened until the bleeding slowed, then braced the tourniquet with both hands and pressed my knees into the pavement to keep his leg still. Across from us, the middle-aged man had stopped breathing. A college-age boy stood over him, frozen. You know, CPR. I took a class, then you know enough, kneel beside him, lock your elbows, push hard in the center of his chest. He obeyed. I counted for him. 1, 2, 3, 4, keep going. The sedan's smoke thickened. Someone shouted that it would burn. Move the woman and child away. I called. Do not pull the driver unless fire reaches the cabin. The man on the phone shouted that fire crews were 6 minutes out. 6 minutes is a lifetime when fuel is moving toward a smoking engine. Isaiah closed his fingers around my wrist. Am I dying? No, I had no right to promise that, so I gave him something else. I spent 38 years in intensive care. I've held more hands than you can imagine. Nobody dies while I'm still holding on. It was the first kind lie I told that day. Sirens grew louder. The student kept pushing. His arms shook. Don't stop, I told him. You stop when I tell you. The first fire engine arrived behind a wall of noise. Firefighters spread foam across the leaking fuel while paramedics ran toward us. One medic reached for Isaiah. I did not release the tourniquet. Ma'am, we have him. I heard him, but my hands would not open. They had cramped around the knot. A firefighter knelt beside me and pulled my fingers away one at a time. You can let go now. I looked at my watch. 19 minutes. They lifted Isaiah onto a stretcher. The student stepped back only when a paramedic took his place. Someone tried to put me on another stretcher. No. My palms were bruised. Both knees were torn through the fabric. And when I stood, the road tilted beneath me. A police officer caught my arm. You're dehydrated, and you nearly fell. I'm fine. He gave me the same look I had given patients for 38 years when they said those words. The ambulance was needed for people who could not walk, so the officer drove me to UPMC Presbyterian for evaluation. Near the police car, a woman with a KDKA microphone hurried toward me. Alicia Reyes, she said, were you the nurse who organized the rescue? I glanced toward the ambulance carrying Isaiah. Ask the boy. I said, he's the one who still has to live after this. The emergency department at UPMC Presbyterian looked smaller from a stretcher. I had worked in that building for 38 years. I knew which hallway used to flood when it rained, which vending machine ate dollar bills, and where the night nurses hid decent coffee. I had stood beside beds in those rooms, translated doctors into ordinary language, and told frightened families when they should call someone to come quickly. But no one knew me. To them, I was simply the older woman in bed 12 needing fluids. The charge nurse had changed. The residents were younger than Dean. Even the color of the curtains was different. A whole generation of people had come and gone while I was busy believing a place could remember you simply because you remembered it. A young nurse named Marisol cleaned the scrapes on my knees and wrapped ice packs around my hands. You've got bruising, dehydration, and probably a mild strain, she said. We're waiting on blood work. I'm fine. She gave me a look. Yes, I said. I know how that sounds. She smiled once, then handed me a clipboard. Just finish the admission form. Who is your emergency contact? I reached for my phone. The screen lit for half a second, showed 1%, and went black. Before it died, I had opened my contacts. My finger stopped at Walt's cell. I had not deleted his number. I did not think I ever would. Deleting it felt too much like agreeing that he would never call again. For 42 years, his was the number I gave every dentist, doctor, school office, and insurance company. He had always been the person who came when somebody said my name and the word emergency in the same sentence. Below his name was Dean, then Corinne. I looked at both names for a long time. Dean was probably still at dinner. Corinne was probably answering emails at her kitchen table. Both had lives that were already full, and I had spent decades teaching them that I could carry anything alone. On the form, I wrote none. Marisol read it. "Ma'am, you need to put somebody, leave it blank. If something happens, we need someone to call." "If something happens," I said, "I don't want anybody to have to leave dinner." She stopped holding the clipboard. For a moment, I thought she might tell me not to be dramatic. Nurses have little patience for drama, especially from other nurses. Instead, she set the form on the counter, pulled a plastic chair beside the bed, and sat down. She did not ask another question. She did not tell me everything would be all right. She simply stayed while we waited for the lab results. There are forms of kindness so small that nobody photographs them. A chair pulled close, a hand placing water within reach, a stranger deciding you should not wait alone. I had offered that kind of kindness hundreds of times without understanding how enormous it could feel from the bed. After several minutes, an officer stepped through the curtain. "We still have your belongings from the scene," he said. "Your bag and phone charger are secured. I can have someone bring them." I sat upright too quickly. "The urn," I said. "Is the urn all right?" He paused. "Yes, ma'am, it's upright and undamaged." Only then did I ask about the bag. My charger was inside it. That was why my phone had gone dead. I had not ignored calls for hours. I simply had no way to receive them while the police held everything at the crash site. By the time an officer delivered the bag, the 6 o'clock news had already begun. I learned the rest later. Dean's boss called him during dinner. "Turn on K, DKA, he said. "I think that's your mother." Dean asked the restaurant to change the television above the bar. He saw me on the pavement beside Isaiah. My scarf tied around the boy's leg, my hands dark with someone else's blood. The fork slipped from his fingers and struck the plate, across town. Corinne was at her kitchen table when a friend sent her a link. "Is this your mom?" She pressed play. The video showed a firefighter peeling my fingers from the tourniquet, while a reporter said my name. Corinne watched it twice. Then she opened our family chat and saw the last message I had sent. "No worries." When my phone finally had enough power to restart, the screen filled with missed calls, I turned it face down on the blanket. For the first time that day, I was not ready to tell anyone I was fine. At 7 the next morning, Dean and Corinne let themselves into my house. I was still at UPMC waiting for the doctor to sign my discharge papers. They said they were there to help to wash the sheets, put food in the refrigerator, and clear the hallway before I came home. But I think they needed something useful to do with their hands after spending the night calling a phone I would not answer. The house still held Walt in ordinary places. His work boots sat beside the garage door. A pencil rested behind the kitchen clock. His reading glasses lay beside an unopened hardware catalog. As if he might return and complain that someone had moved them, Dean went into the garage first. The blue Silverado remained beneath its canvas tarp, exactly where it had been since Walt and I left for Houston. Dust had gathered along the hood. Dean pulled the tarp back, perhaps because touching his father's truck felt easier than touching anything else in the house. Behind the rear tire, he found a wooden box. Walt had built it himself. Dean recognized the dovetail joints and the narrow strip of walnut set into the lid. Across the top, in Walt's careful carved lettering, were the words, "For Dean and Corinne, when you are ready," Dean called his sister. They carried the box to Walt's workbench. Inside were 7 small leather notebooks. Their corners had softened from years of handling, and each was marked with a year. At first, they assumed the books were about Walt, his work, his illness, his sacrifices, perhaps even the disappointments he had never said aloud. That would have been easier. A father's private suffering would have given them something familiar to regret. What they found instead was a record of the person they had mistaken for endlessly capable. Dean opened the first notebook. The handwriting belonged to his father. The story belonged to me. Nell took extra night shifts for 11 months. She said she preferred nights because the hospital was quieter. She does not prefer nights. Dean needed the down payment for his house. Dean stopped reading. He had always believed the money came from savings. I had told him we had planned for it. That was true, in a way. I had simply never explained what we stopped planning for, or how many mornings I drove home with the windows open so the cold air would keep me awake. Corinne opened another notebook. Today, Nell told Corinne that we had decided to retire early, so we were giving up the trip. The truth is that we paid her divorce lawyer, Nell said. She needs to keep her dignity. Walt. Corinne covered her mouth. Her divorce had lasted 14 months. She believed the lawyer had reduced his fee because he felt sorry for her. I never corrected her. Another page. Nell stopped physical therapy for her shoulder. She said it was better. It is not better. Theo needs braces. Corinne looked toward the kitchen, as if she could see every time I had lifted groceries with my left arm because my right shoulder still hurt. Then she found the entry from 2023. 42 years, and she still eats the wings and says she likes them better than the breast. That sentence hurt them differently. Sacrifice looks noble when it involves money. Sometimes it is simply choosing the smaller piece so often that everyone forgets you ever had a choice. Dean reached for the newest notebook. 4 months earlier, Walt had written, "Nell sold her car today. She told the children she barely drives anymore. Last week, she drove that car 6 hours to bring me home from the airport." Dean closed his eyes. His reply was still in the family chat. "Makes sense, Ma." Then he found an entry dated 5 months earlier. Today I texted Dean and asked whether he could come to Houston for a few days. He read it. He did not answer. I deleted the message before Nell saw it. She has carried enough. She does not need to carry my disappointment too. Dean lowered himself onto the garage floor. Not the chair, not the stool beside the workbench. The concrete floor where Walt's sawdust still rested in the cracks. "I saw it," he said. "I was going into a meeting. I thought I would answer later." Corinne did not tell him it was all right. Some truths should not be softened before they have been fully heard. She opened the last written page and began reading aloud. "I need to be fair." Her voice failed. She started again. "Nell and I taught our children that we never needed anything. We hid the bills, softened every request, and turned every sacrifice into something that sounded convenient. We taught them so well that they believed us. If one day they do not know how to care for their mother, part of that belongs to us. We never gave them the chance to practice." Corinne could not finish the final sentence. Her thumb trembled against the page, as if closing it would make everything permanent. Dean read the final words silently over her shoulder. Not one of the 7 notebooks recorded what Walt believed his children owed him. Not one listed his own sacrifices. Every page documented the things I had done and then hidden, because Walt knew I would never tell the story myself. For years, He had watched me disappear in small pieces and written each piece down. For the first time, my children understood that silence was not the absence of a story. It was where their father had hidden mine. Alicia Reyes came back to the hospital just before I was discharged. She did not bring a camera. That mattered. She stood near the curtain with both hands around a paper cup and said, "Mrs. Vance, I'm not here for an interview. Isaiah's mother asked me to tell you he made it through surgery. They saved his leg. For the first time since the accident, I let myself breathe all the way out. Is he awake? Not yet." But the doctors are hopeful. The hospital could not have told her that. Privacy laws are strict for a reason. Isaiah's family had chosen to send the message themselves. I nodded and looked down at my bandaged hands. "Thank you." Alicia stayed where she was. My father died in a nursing home 3 years ago. She said, "I was working a story in Erie. I thought I had time to call him after the live shot." She looked at the floor. I didn't. There are confessions that ask for forgiveness. And there are confessions that simply explain why someone is standing in front of you. Hers was the second kind. Then she asked, "Would you speak with me?" "I don't trust reporters." I said, "I understand. I've watched enough television to know that pain gets packaged between advertisements." She did not argue. That helped. "I'll agree on one condition." I said, "Any question I don't like, I don't answer." Alicia nodded. "Fair." The interview was filmed in a quiet consultation room. No dramatic music, no bright studio lights, just one camera, 2 chairs, and my bag resting beside my feet. Walt was still inside it. Alicia began with the accident. How I counted the injured, how I knew Isaiah needed a tourniquet, why I refused an ambulance. Those questions were easy. Then she asked the one that was not. "Did your family know you were flying home that day?" I felt my phone in my coat pocket. The 2 messages were still there. "Ma, can you get an Uber, Mom? I'm buried at work. Could you please get a ride?" I knew exactly what millions of people expected me to say then. I could have read the messages aloud. I could have named the restaurant where Dean had been eating. The meeting Corinne believed she could not miss. The 40 minutes I sat beneath a silent television while families found one another around me. I could have let the whole country judge my children. For 1 second, I wanted to. Not because I hated them, because being publicly understood can feel very close to being privately avenged. Then I thought of Walt's notebooks. I thought of the last page. We taught them so well that they believed us. So I said, they have busy lives. They're raising children, working, carrying more than I ever had to carry at their age. Alicia watched me carefully. "You don't sound angry." "I've been sad enough this week," I said. Adding anger won't make the week any lighter. She did not ask to see the messages. She had promised I could refuse any question, and she kept that promise. I still do not trust reporters as a group. I have seen too many people sell someone else's grief for advertising money. But that woman kept her word. That was not journalism to me. That was one human being knowing how to keep a promise. The segment aired that night. By morning, clips of it were everywhere. People did not share it because I had helped at the crash. They shared it because of 4 words. They have busy lives. Some viewers called it forgiveness. Others called it heartbreak. A few called it an excuse. I called it the truth I could live with. By noon, strangers were quoting the line beneath photographs of parents. Radio hosts repeated it. Churches shared it in newsletters. People wrote that they had called their mothers after watching. None of that changed what happened at the airport. Attention does not repair neglect. It only turns a private wound toward the light, where everyone can see its shape. Dean watched the clip alone in his office. He later told me he locked the door before pressing play. When I said those 4 words, he lowered his head into both hands. "Mom," he whispered, "I don't deserve you." Across town. Jenna watched with Theo beside her. Theo was 11, old enough to understand unfairness and young enough to ask about it directly. "Why is Grandma saying nice things about Dad?" he asked. "If somebody hurt me, I wouldn't defend them." Jenna opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no answer that would not either wound her husband or lie to her son. So they sat together in silence while the clip played again. The country heard me protect my children. My children heard exactly what I had chosen not to say. Corinne brought Walt's truck to the hospital. The old blue Silverado looked unfamiliar without the dust. She had washed it, vacuumed the cab, and polished the dashboard until the cracked plastic shone. She had even replaced the empty peppermint tin Walt kept beside the gearshift. The engine idled unevenly, exactly as it always had. She met me at the curb and held out the keys. "I cleaned it," she said. "Changed the oil, too. I didn't know what else to do." I looked at the truck, then at her. "How are you getting home?" Her eyes dropped to the pavement. "I ordered a ride." She said it like a confession. I understood then that she had chosen the words carefully. She wanted to feel, for one trip, the small humiliation she had handed me at the airport. She could not undo that evening, but she could stop protecting herself from what it had felt like. I took the keys. When we reached my house, the front steps were covered in flowers. Some had cards, most did not. The lawn had been cut, the trash cans rolled back from the curb, and a casserole sat inside a cooler near the door. No one rang the bell. That kindness mattered. They helped without turning my grief into a receiving line. They left evidence of care and allowed me to decide when I was strong enough to look at it. A television crew had already spoken to Frank Petrosky, my neighbor of 30 years. Nell gave my wife insulin shots for 2 years. He told them, "Never took $1. Half this block never knew. She's not the kind who announces what she does." I watched the clip once and turned it off. Public praise can feel almost as uncomfortable as public pity. Both ask you to stand still while strangers decide what your pain means. 3 weeks later, someone knocked. Doris Kellerman stood on the porch holding a dish covered with aluminum foil. "I told you at the airport I hoped somebody would do the same for you," she said. Then I watched television for 3 days and saw that nobody had, so I decided to do it myself. Inside was chicken and dumplings. She stayed for coffee. She did not ask about the accident. She asked whether Walt had liked cinnamon in his coffee. And then listened to the answer. People imagine reconciliation happens in one perfect conversation. Ours did not. It began with an argument in my kitchen. Corinne pointed at Dean. "You were the one who wrote." "Get an Uber." Dean's face tightened. "And you wrote, 'I'm buried at work. Is that supposed to be better?'" At least I answered. "Yes," he said. "You answered to remind Mom she picked the wrong day to bring Dad home." Corinne went still. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor, the same floor I had scrubbed for 40 years. Jenna stood in the doorway. "You two are competing over who gets to feel worse," she said. "Neither of you is the victim in this house." No one defended themselves after that. We sat at the kitchen table when the anger had burned itself out. Dean kept turning one of Walt's old coffee cans between his hands. It was still filled with screws sorted by size. "When we were kids," he said, "Dad used to hide in the garage whenever he got mad. He'd sort screws into these cans. He wasn't sorting anything," I said. Dean looked up. Then what was he doing waiting? For what? Until he could answer you kindly. Dean stared into the can. That was Walt's discipline, not silence, delay. He understood that the first honest thing you feel is not always the first thing you should say. The apologies came later, but the actions came first. Dean slept on my sofa for 17 nights. He never explained why. He brought one bag, used Walt's old blanket, and left for work before 7 each morning. I pretended not to notice that he checked the locks twice before going to sleep. Corinne set a weekly alarm for Wednesday at 8 in the morning. She showed it to me only once. The label said, "Pick up Mom." Every Wednesday, she arrived. Sometimes we had breakfast. Sometimes she drove me to the pharmacy. Once we sat in the truck outside a grocery store for 20 minutes because neither of us was ready to go inside. The point was not what we did. The point was that she came. Dean eventually brought me an envelope. Inside was a check and a list of everything he believed he owed the down payment. The Houston travel, the money for Theo's braces, even an estimate for the night shifts I had worked. "I want to pay it back," he said. I pushed the envelope toward him. "No, Mom, please, spend it on your son. That doesn't make us even. We are not keeping accounts." He looked at the check. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Invest it where I did." I said, "In your child. That is the only repayment that matters." He put the envelope away. An apology is easy when it costs only breath. Theirs cost time, sleep, pride, changed plans, and the willingness to return after the shame had stopped being dramatic. That was how I knew they meant it. Isaiah came to my house 6 weeks after the accident. He was on crutches, moving carefully, with his mother beside him and a folded sheet of paper in one hand. The scar on his leg was hidden beneath his jeans, but I could see how deliberately he placed each foot. Isaiah gave me the paper. It was an application for an EMT course at the community college. "I want to learn what you did for me," he said. His mother began to cry before I did. I folded the application carefully. Because some pieces of paper are really promises wearing ordinary clothes. Theo stood in the hallway, watching Isaiah explain the classes, the clinical hours, and how long it might take before he could ride in an ambulance. After they left, Theo remained by the door. "Grandma, what would have happened if somebody had picked you up that day?" I had no answer. He looked toward the empty chair beside the window and answered for me. "Then his mom would be like you now. Children can reach the truth without needing to soften it first." 4 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon, Corinne sent me a message. "Mom, I can't come today. I'm stuck in a meeting." I read it and smiled. 30 seconds later, another message appeared. "Can I come tomorrow morning? Instead, I'll bring pastries from Dad's place." The old Corinne would have let the first message become the whole story. The woman she was becoming added a second sentence and made another plan. Healing does not mean people stop being busy. It means that when life interrupts them, they come back. There had been 7 notebooks in Walt's box. I gave Dean and Corinne 6. I kept the 7th. When I came home, I found it beneath the others in the box. Its cover was darker, and Walt had not written a year on the front. There was one entry inside that I could not let our children carry. Walt had written it 4 months before he died. "Nell told me insurance is covering almost everything in Houston. I know she is lying. I called the insurance company last week. I agreed to the treatment anyway. Not because I believe it will work. The doctor was honest with me. I agreed because for 42 years, she has saved me from everything. And I cannot take away her right to try to save me one more time. That is the last gift I can give my wife. Let her try." I sat with that page for a long time. All those months. I had believed I was protecting Walt from the cost. He had known. He had allowed me to empty accounts, sell my car, and chase 14% because refusing would have taken something from me that mattered more than money: hope. For 42 years, we lied to each other out of love. I told him the bills were manageable. He told me he believed the treatment might work. Neither lie was meant to deceive. Each was meant to make the road easier for the other person to walk. I will carry that secret with me. On Walt's birthday, the family gathered in the backyard. We spread his ashes beneath the maple tree he planted in 1988. Dean held the urn. Corinne read one paragraph from the notebooks. Jenna placed flowers near the trunk. Doris sent chicken and dumplings, though nobody had asked her to. We left one chair empty, not because we believed Walt might sit in it, but because absence deserves a place at the table too. Theo and I worked beside the garage on a wooden toolbox. He measured twice, cut once, and still managed to make one side uneven. He placed it on the bench and frowned. "It isn't straight." "Grandma," I ran my hand along the crooked edge. "No family is..." "Sweetheart." He looked at me, then at the toolbox. "Can we still use it?" That is what families are for. Families rarely break because of one terrible moment. They are taken apart one screw at a time through calls postponed, messages read and left unanswered, visits delayed, and the belief that there will always be another chance. Sometimes there is not. If you are somebody's child, make one call today. Do not wait for an emergency to give you permission. If you are the person waiting for that call, I want you to know this: you are not a burden. You are loving people who may not yet have learned how to see what your presence costs you. And if you want to share this story with someone but worry they will think you are accusing them, send it to someone else. Somewhere, a person is sitting beside an empty chair and needs to hear that they are not the only one. Before you leave, write the city where you are listening and the name of the person you thought about during this story. You do not have to explain why. We read every one, and if stories like this matter to you, subscribe. We do not tell stories about revenge here. We tell stories about people who still choose kindness when they have every reason not to.